This is Far From Home. I'm Scott Gurian, and like many people, I've been pushed by the protests for racial justice these past few weeks to take a step back, re-examine my place in the world, and think once again about how so many people go through vastly different experiences in life simply because of the color of their skin. If it's not already clear, I'm a white guy who grew up in a fairly comfortable middle-class background, and I also tend to be an eternal optimist. So I often find myself falling into the trap of taking certain things for granted or making assumptions that life's problems always have solutions. But I've slowly been learning that many things that may come easy to me might be much harder for other people due to circumstances beyond their control, like their race, gender, or ethnic origin. So I've been trying to teach myself to do less talking and more listening to stories from people from different backgrounds so I can get a better understanding of where they're coming from and what they're going through. And also realizing that I know far less than I once thought I knew. If you're a fan of this show, you know that during normal times, when we're not in a global pandemic, traveling is a big part of my life. I've found that experiencing cultures and seeing how people live in other parts of the world is amazingly effective at breaking down stereotypes and opening my eyes to different perspectives. But while my initial instinct is to encourage everyone to travel as much as they can, I'm reminded that not everyone has that luxury. Many simply can't afford to go abroad, even if they're traveling as cheaply as possible, or they can't get time off from work. Not everyone can easily get a passport, and some people might feel unsafe or unwelcome going to particular places just because of what they look like. Now, I'll admit that last point is something I never really thought much about until recently, when I had discussions with a couple of black friends from high school who've themselves done a fair amount of international traveling. In the midst of this big conversation we're all having right now about race relations, I thought it would be interesting to share some of what they told me about what it's like to always stick out from the crowd and be treated differently, even when they're just trying their best to fit in. Here are their stories.
My name is Nathan Jackson. I'm 40 years old. I'm from Hoboken, New Jersey, and I work as a compliance officer for a financial services company. I've been across 5 continents. I haven't been to Australia or Antarctica yet, but those are on my bucket list before I die.
I'm Coy Daly. I am 40 years old, going to be 41. I'm getting old. Good gosh. I live in New York, New York City, in Inwood. And my job is I'm the Director of Diversity and Equity at the Bank Street School for Children in Manhattan.
I remember when I was younger, my mom bought a set of encyclopedias. We grew up, working class, and she said, here, I bought these for you, read them, and you'll learn something. And every time we would come home from school with those little pamphlets, and it's like, hey, I want to get the new set of whatever books. She's like, you read those encyclopedias. I bought those. I paid for those. You read those. And so in those books, I learned about countries I'd never heard of before. I'm learning about Iran. I'm learning about Oman. I'm learning about China. I'm learning about Mongolia. And I'm a kid that grew up in Jersey City. So my world is Jersey City, or the state of New Jersey. But then it opened my eyes to a world beyond myself. And so that's when I said, when I get older, I'm going to get on a plane and I'm going to start traveling. And once you start it, you can't stop.
When I first met my wife, we were teaching together in DC, actually. We taught the same math class together. We co-taught. And when we started dating, she's like, you must be into travel to date. Like, if you're going to date me, I love to travel. You have to be able to do that. And I was like, yeah, I travel. I did not travel. I did road trips. I thought that's what she meant. No, I didn't know she meant like get on a plane and just fly across the ocean back and forth. Do what you do. That's what she meant by travel. So our first travel trip was to Shenandoah Valley. Second travel trip was to North Carolina to see a New Edition concert. Third trip, Argentina for the whole summer. Yeah, that's how we started. And ever since then, we just travel around. So I would say we've been to 60 countries, and we actually find the cheapest flight out of the country. And wherever that gets us, then that's how the adventure starts.
The first big trip I took, I went to Canada. And, most people don't think of Canada as being an international destination, but I was a part of a youth group at the time. I was 15, and I was the American representative to this international youth organization. So my first international trip was to Halifax, Nova Scotia. And the funny thing about that trip is I was a newbie to traveling. So, I had my passport, showed up late. I nearly missed a flight. They bumped me up. I flew first class for the first time. Everyone thought I was a child actor. And they're like, oh, so why are you going to Canada? Oh, what TV show are you on? Are you a musician? I'm like, no, I'm just a kid going to a youth conference. Got to Halifax, didn't realize that Canada uses a whole different currency. I was paying everything in dollar bills, and everyone was treating me so well, and I didn't realize that I was overpaying for everything. So when I got in a cab, I tipped them $20, and he's like, oh my God, you come back again. And I have no idea that I'm just spending money as if I was some millionaire. That was my first big trip. The first time I was really out of my element, I would say I was in China. No one looked like me. No one really spoke English. I got lost so many times. Everyone kept, wanting to come up and touch me. I was something almost like alien-esque to them. And so that was a little jarring, but it was never in a malicious kind of way. It was more like, oh my God, there's a brown man walking around amongst us who, he's different. He's not from here.
I remember being in Iceland when someone actually grabbed my arm. We were in the gym working out, and a woman comes up to me, and she's speaking some other language I didn't know, but she was gesturing and saying, like, your skin is so dark. I've never seen anything like this. We know it in the U.S. someone does and grab your arm. They're like, whoa, that's very racist. It was actually straight curiosity, because in Iceland, there are not many black people at all.
I was traveling across the Balkan countries, and there aren't many people of color there. And so everyone was excited to see me. I don't know whether it was because they thought I was a wealthy American traveler. I mean, I've heard Will Smith. I've heard Dave Chappelle. I heard Usher. So I'm like, no, I'm not Usher. And I had just crossed the border from Albania into Montenegro. And I was just in this small town over the border, one of those places where it's not really on anyone's radar. I was traveling with a buddy. He's like, let's just go here, just see, what it's like. And so as we're walking around, these two guys come up to me and they're just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I'm looking around. I'm like, you talking about me? And they're like, yes. And so one of them motions to take a picture with me. So I'm like, okay. So I take his camera and I take his picture. And he's like, no, my picture with you. So his buddy takes our picture and then he switches and they both have their picture taken with me. As this is happening, people are walking past. And so they're speaking in a language I don't understand. I can't speak Serb-Croatian, and they're pointing and they're smiling and they're taking pictures of these two guys taking a picture with me. So in this small town, all of a sudden, there was a rumor that I was some American celebrity. So everywhere I went, they were following me. Like I would turn and look and they were smiling, or I'd go into a store and it's just, I was greeted with this like, oh my God, I can't believe you're here. But I'm like, I'm not anyone. I'm no one. But in their head, I was just some famous person.
Before long, Nate got used to being the center of attention because, what choice did he have? And he figured that if he really wanted to learn to be comfortable in his own skin, the best way to do that was to put himself to the ultimate test. He decided to go to a nude beach.
And I thought to myself, hey, I don't know anyone here. And it seems to be the thing. Everyone was just kind of undressing. So I'm like, all right, let's just try it. When am I ever going to have this opportunity again? And so I did. And it was just interesting. And even then, people just walk up to you and start talking because you're something different. And it's like, hi, how are you? I'm like, I don't think we should, have a conversation right now. But it was just so natural. And it taught me to be comfortable with myself. Because here, growing up, you're always cognizant that you're a person of color. Even in the most minute ways, you're always aware of it. But that one day I was like, all right, I'm just going to be brave and go out here and just see what happens. And I think it's been great for me as a person to experience these things. And so I always thank my mom for buying those encyclopedias and encouraging me to see the world that she introduced me to in these books that I had to read as a child while everyone else was playing.
Now, to be clear, both Nate and Coy say they've also had their share of negative experiences, where it seemed pretty clear they were facing outright discrimination.
After we started traveling a bit, I actually started researching, what are race relations in different countries? Because my wife is Asian, I'm Black, and I don't know how interracial couples are received in places. So I think the first place I was the most guarded, to be honest, was going to Peru. Because looking up Peruvian history, there's some colorism there. And that's part of stemming back to the transatlantic slave trade and things like that, which I didn't know. And I forgot what town it was, but it was one town where I couldn't understand it, but people really stared at me. And actually, it was one point, someone pointed a finger at me, laughed in my face. And I'm like, I've never had anything like this. I don't know how to explain that feeling, but I noticed that throughout this whole travel.
I was in northern Italy, and I was in a small town in between Bologna and Milan. Just one of those places where you're like, oh, let's just stop here because it looks cool. And I was walking through the center of town, and, I'm one of the few people of color that's there. Everyone's kind of looking, but not really paying me much attention. I'm just kind of meandering around, and I take my iPhone out to take a picture, and I saw out the corner of my eye this lady had this shocked look on her face, and the first thing she did was check her pocketbook to see if her iPhone was in her pocketbook. And she looked so shocked that I pulled mine out, oh my God, he has my phone. That could be my phone. But then when she saw that her phone was in her pocketbook, she had this relief come over her. And then she and her friend just kept walking, and they said something to one another, and they looked in my direction, and then they just kept walking. I'm like, you assumed that I stole your phone. And it wasn't until you realize, oh, he has one too, that it was okay. I wasn't even near you, but that's your first impression of me. And that was just kind of a little jarring. That just sat with me for the entire trip.
Other times, they've found themselves in situations that just felt strange and awkward, like when Nate was arriving in Germany recently, waiting in line to get his passport stamped, and the immigration officer wrongly assumed that he must be traveling with the other Black guy who'd gotten off the plane, who he didn't even know. But for the most part, Nate and Coy both say their experiences traveling abroad have been surprisingly positive, even when they feared the worst.
Leaving the U.S., the first thing in my mind is what I'm conditioned in the U.S. So the first thing I see is when people looking at me, I'm like, oh, they say I'm Black man. All the assumptions and stereotypes I'm used to dealing with when I travel to the U.S., I immediately go there. But then I noticed that people first see me as American, and that means something different. So yes, I'm Black, and yes, there's racism all throughout the world. But I notice when they know I'm American, it's something else that get added in a positive way. As in often I feel more accepted. We were in Split, Croatia over Christmas a couple of years ago. And my wife and I were the two darkest spots in the whole town. And as we walked out, we were very aware of this. No one else seemed to care. I remember one experience, we went to a shop to look at souvenirs, and I picked up something off the shelf, and the shop owner came on and was like, put that down. No, you don't want that. And I was like, uh-oh, here we go. They're like, no, if you're going to buy some, here's what you buy. This is the better quality. And I'm like, what's the setup? What's the setup? You're going to think I'm doing something. And no, that's what it was. If you're going to buy something, get something worthwhile. Don't get the cheap stuff. Get something that you're going to want to take with you.
Sometimes Nate says that standing out from the crowd has actually produced hilarious results.
I was in Buenos Aires with my friend Alvin, and we've always been those people where we'll just go, okay, this club looks fun, or this bar looks fun. Let's just get in line and see what happens. And so it was maybe 11:30 midnight. We're standing in the line. The security comes out. We're the only two Black people in the line. So he looks at us, gives us a hard look, and he walks past and he goes away. Then he comes back and he's like, you, come with me. And then at first we were like, what did we do? We didn't do anything. We were just standing in line. We were just kind of waiting our turn and just kind of going through the motions. And so he's like, no. And they were pushing us. And my friend is like, what did we do? We didn't do anything. We're just standing in line. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Let's just go. And he's pushing us and pushing us and pushing us. So finally he pushes us through the door and they lead us upstairs into this club. And he's like, you wait here. And then someone else comes and they bring us into this room and we sit down and we're just like, what is happening? And so the manager comes in and he's like, "Hey guys, I'm so excited to see you. How's it going?" And we're looking at each other like we're doing fine. And he's like, "If you have your CD, let us know. We can play your music tonight." They thought we were rappers. They were just like, "You don't have to stand in line. You can just come on inside and come up to the VIP." I think Alvin had a fitted Yankee hat on at the time, and I think I had one on as well. We just like dressed like typical New Yorkers, and we didn't realize that we resembled a rap duo. But that night was kind of, we got the taste of what a celebrity nightlife would be like, because we had girls come in, they're sitting in our laps, they're taking pictures with us, we're signing autographs. We have girls auditioning to be in our video, and one girl is like, "I've been taking hip-hop dance classes in New York. Let me show you what I can do." And we're looking at one another, and I'm like, "Who do they think we are?" And he's like, "I don't know. Let's just see how long we can go with this." They're bringing bottles of champagne and bottles of liquor, and they're like catering to our every needs. And at one point, we were like, we have to get out of here before they realize that we're not rappers. And then when the bill comes, that's going to be the issue. So we actually had to, go down onto the dance floor. And I'm like, "All right, you go down on the dance floor, I go on the dance floor. We'll kind of mingle in the crowd, and then hopefully that'll give us a cover to, leave without being noticed." And so even when we went down on the dance floor, once again, we are, stand out amongst the crowd. So we start dancing and try to have a good time. But the music that they were playing had been music that we heard here months ago. So we're just dancing like, "Oh yeah, we know this song," and we're doing dances from back home. Now everyone is crowded around us. I'm like, "Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead." And I'm like, no matter where we go, we are just the center of attention. And then finally we meet this one girl, and it's always like that one person that is going to throw off your entire night. And she's like, "Who are you guys?" We're like, we're that group. And she's like, "I don't know. I've never heard of you guys before." And we're like, "Where are you from?" And she's like, "I'm from Piscataway." I'm like, "New Jersey?" She's like, "Yeah." We're like, "Oh no." I was like, "We have to get out of here." And I was like, "You get to the door and you go out, and then I'll get to the door and we'll go out." And that's how we ended that night.
When Nate told me the story, it just seemed crazy to me. Like, the people at this club really thought he and his friend Alvin were famous rappers simply because they were black. But he said it's actually not as far-fetched as it sounds.
I think a lot of it is perceptions of us that they get from TV, movies. So it's like, okay, when you think of Black Americans, we play basketball, we play football, we're singers, we're entertainers, we're actors. And so I think when you're Black people that travel, it's automatically with the assumption that you are of means or you have some type of wealth. And I would talk to, locals like on the bus, and they would always ask, "What do you do?" And I had one girl tell me, she's like, when we think of Black people in America, we just think poor. And I was like, what makes you say that? What would make you think that? And she's like, "Well, that's what we see on television. It's like, oh, they're all poor except for this hand-selected few. So you have, your Oprahs and your Beyoncés." She's like, "And so when I see you traveling and we don't see Black people here, it's with the automatic assumption that you are, quote unquote, one of the chosen ones or one of the ones that have, means," which is an interesting dynamic. And so I always say when I travel, I try to be the ambassador and try to show people, okay, I am Black, I am American, and, I don't fit whatever stereotype you have in your mind because it's never right.
You mentioned being an ambassador. Like, what is that like? Because I remember, like, when I went to Iran a few years ago, and I was the first American many people had ever met. And so I felt that, it's fine. I mean, I feel like if they're going to get an impression of the United States, I feel like I could give them a somewhat good impression, and I'll do my best. And so I kind of went with it. But at the same time, I felt like there was this enormous weight on my shoulders all the time that I couldn't make the slightest mistake or say, it's like I'm the representative of my country. And I'm wondering how that feels for you, that you're always in that position where you may be the first Black person anyone's ever met when you're traveling to some of these countries.
I think that comes from years of having to do it. I remember being in high school where you are one of the few Black kids, and possibly you've been someone's only Black friend or someone's only Black teammate or the only Black person that has ever stepped foot in their house. So I think having that experience kind of prepared me for what was to come. You know that, okay, I'm representing a group of people. And so, yes, there's this pressure on you, and sometimes it might be a self-inflicted pressure where you just can't be you. You just can't be Nathan. You are Nathan black person. That can be pretty exhausting, but I've had years and years and years of experience and years of preparation. So I think now it comes natural where you look around and you're like, okay, I know what I need to do here. It just kind of kicks in. It's like innate now.
Coy says he also feels this pressure when he's traveling to constantly push back against people's preconceived notions of the stereotypical African American.
My wife and I, I'm going to tell you this. Me and my wife, we have this thing of we count how many people we think may be black or Asian when we travel. We have this internal battle to say who won. Why are we doing that? Because one thing I have noticed that I have not met many black Americans abroad in my travels, which is interesting. So if I have not met many ever, how else does the world understand us or see that we're not a monolith? Like, for example, the first thing I always get generally because of hip hop culture, because of how black Americans are often portrayed in movies and media on TV, people immediately start talking slang to me. And I'm like, yeah, that's good day to you. How are you? Like I try to say, like, that's not the only way of what blackness is, you know? So I'm mindful of that. Like, I want to show that whatever notions you have, you need to explore a little bit more. Like I would say, I would love to see people highlighting, like, you know, I love Broadway musicals. Let me see the dude who loves math, does Broadway musicals, you know, interested in skiing.
Who happens to be black.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, because that's me.
When he's treated differently, Nate says he does the best he can to just roll with it, because he recognizes that there are certain unavoidable challenges that people of color face when they're traveling. But he told me that constantly being stared at does sort of wear him down after a while, even when folks are being super friendly. He says he's developed an appreciation for what he thinks Kanye West or Barack Obama must go through every single day. Sometimes he wishes there were more people that looked like him so he could just fit in.
I was in Budva, Montenegro, which is a resort town, but is popular with Russians. It's almost like Miami Beach, but on the Adriatic. There's a series of nightclubs, there's a series of restaurants, and everyone goes to Budva. And so I was coming on nearly 2 weeks where I hadn't seen another black person. And everyone's just kind of looking at you like, all right, yes, look at me. Yes, I'm black. I just started to get tired of the fanfare and the celebrity. And finally, I'm just sitting there, and my friend and I are sitting on the bench, and it was raining that day, so we didn't go into the water, and we just kind of walked around the town just to kill time because we had another day there or so. And we were looking around, and we were just watching people walk by and just see what, you know, the everyday culture is like. And I happened to look up, and maybe a half a mile down the road, I see this figure. And I was like, do my eyes deceive me? It was almost like a mirage. And so I stand up, and then that person saw me too. And he starts running toward me, and I start running toward him. And when we finally got to each other, we looked at one another. We're like, oh my God, I'm so happy to see you. It was another black person. We wind up hugging in a full-on embrace. And we're circling around. You would think that two brothers had reunited for the first time in like 10 years. And so everyone in this town is looking like, oh my God, there's two of them. And he's like, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from the United States. I'm like, where are you from? He's like, I'm from Canada. He's like, I'm just so excited to see you. I'm like, I'm excited to see you as well. And then we hugged again. And he's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, I'm on vacation. I'm like, what are you doing here? He's like, I'm in culinary school. And we hugged again. And we just hugged like real tight for like a couple minutes, and then we broke apart, and it's like, yeah, well, it's good seeing you. It's good seeing you too. And then he turned and walked away with his friends, and I turned and walked back toward my friend, and we didn't bother to exchange emails or phone numbers and keep in touch. And then my friend was like, what was that? And I was like, that was just another black person I've seen. He's like, why are you hugging this man? Do you know him? I'm like, no, I don't know him. But we just had this common connection where it's like, I see you, you see me. We have this shared experience. For that moment, you just felt, okay, I'm not in this alone. There's someone else here that can kind of identify with what I'm going through. Because when I would tell my friend, yeah, I'm tired of people looking at me. It's not mean, but I'm just tired of always being stared at. And he's like, oh, it's all in your head. I'm like, it's not in my head. I know what I'm experiencing. And please don't, discredit what I'm feeling. I know what I'm feeling. I know what I'm experiencing. And in that moment, that guy felt it because he was feeling the same thing. And although he didn't have to tell me with words, just his actions and his excitement was just enough.
Nate and Coy also told me they feel like they need to do a ton of planning before departing on any trip. I mean, if it were up to me, I'd usually just pick up a guidebook and maybe ask some friends for recommendations of restaurants or things to see. But Coy said he's much more strategic.
I do a lot of research to understand what are the cultural norms when I travel. I could tell you my whole process. Part of our travel is when we're about to book flights. I start with WikiTravel first. I usually then go to TripAdvisor, see what happens there, what's laid out. And then I just Google random combinations, Black and Asian travel, interracial couple, Black man, Asian woman, history of race relations. I just type in all these different things to see what comes up in those places we're going to. And then if I find stuff that seems like, oh, it's not too bad, we're like, let's book it, we go. But then while I'm on the flight going over there, I always come across some other website somewhere that I save offline. So before we land, I'm like, all right, what are the scams to know? Do you take a taxi? Do you take a public thing? How's that connected to? If there are any things that happen with race, so if we take a cab, will someone see us and then upcharge us because we're tourists? Would it be something different because of our cultural, ethnic, nationality, race, whatever? So this is all that process. And some of this is what you're supposed to do when you travel. But remember, with all the other information I'm researching about our safety in terms of who we are, that adds extra anxiety to it. Even around the U.S., when we travel, we pretty much driven across the whole country. That's based on our goal of going to every Major League Baseball stadium. But as we plan our trip, we plan on where are places that if we want to stop, where do we need to be? Where do we need to land? That we can make sure we're staying out of harm's way because we never know who you're going to interact with. We're more vigilant in the U.S., by the way. I feel safer traveling the world than traveling in my own country. How about that? As we travel the world, when we do home exchanges, we don't stress too much about it. It's just hey, this sounds like a cool place. In the U.S., we have to look at where the exchange is coming from. What city is it? What state? What happens there? What's the history of that place? We have to do all that research before we consider doing it. When we've done couch surfing in the U.S., we're very deliberate in where we're going to couch surf, where we're going to pay for a hotel room. We would never drive and just say, let's just pull over in this motel right here. We would never do that. We map it out. We got to know where we go and how we get in there. We won't drive more than 6 hours, but there's certain towns we look at, what's in between big destinations. And we plot based on that, what the counties look like, how the county vote, any history of people passing through that there were some challenging spaces. I'm very cautious of that. And I think on her side, she worries about me as a Black man traveling because we've been together long enough. She knows how generally in the U.S. Black men are viewed. That's what she keeps in the back of her mind. Am I going to be safe? Because I like to go out to bars and talk to people like that. Am I going to be safe when I go out if I take a stroll down the street? That's what she has to encounter. That reality of knowing if I get pulled over by the police, I'm frozen because I'm so scared of what can happen. That's trauma right there. You're so nervous because you know that this can go wrong. Officer, I'm just going to let you know I need to pull my wallet out because that's where my papers that you're asking me for, my license is, or my insurance is in my glove compartment. I need to go there. But just to have to narrate all that and go slowly, at the end of it, you're still shaking.
There are states I've been to through West Virginia, through parts of North Carolina where you're driving and you see overpasses with, N-word on it. Don't let the sun shine on your back. Or you walk into a diner and you're blatantly ignored and they take the people behind you and you're like, wow, I'm in my own country. This is the place where I was born. This is the place where I was raised. And you're treating me like a second-class citizen. I'll never forget I was in Colorado going to a friend's wedding and we were in a small town near Georgetown, Colorado. There were 2 people of color, myself and my friend Jerome, and we're just with our friends and we're just walking back from a diner and we see this pickup truck keep passing. We see the truck drive one direction and then it slows down and it drives the next and it slows down and drives the next. And then about the 5th time, it was like, you guys lost? And it wasn't in the sense that, are you lost? Let me help you. It was almost, are you lost? You shouldn't be here. And then we're like, no, we're fine. And then you knew, okay, we need to get back into the hotel because it's dark and we don't need to be out here. It's those little things where you feel like, okay, maybe this is not for us. Those experiences happen all the time. And you almost get used to it in a sense, or you're almost waiting for it to happen.
Are there particular places where you've thought about going, but you've decided, okay, I just wouldn't feel safe going there?
Mississippi, Nebraska, parts of Georgia outside of Atlanta, parts of Florida. I would love to see Western Virginia, but I just know that why, and it's just no, just no. And I know that people will listen and they would say, well, don't let things limit you. And I know I shouldn't, but I also know that that's not for me at this point. And it's funny because I'm much more adventurous when I'm outside of the country than I am here. But that's how I feel, especially nowadays. I have a map where I have, different pins of where I've been, and a lot of the American states have not been filled in. Because I just have no desire to go to many of these places.
What would have to change for you to feel comfortable going?
I think people of color just want to be. And they just want to live and experience things without feeling less than or something other. We just want to be. I want to walk into a restaurant and feel like I'm at home, especially when I'm on my own soil and a place that I know and love and, wear proudly when I'm away. They're like, where are you from? I'm proud to say America. But then you come back here and when you're not treated fairly or you're not treated with dignity, that hurts because that's all we want. And I think once there is some sort of sweep and change and we feel like, okay, I can just get in the car and I can drive across country and I don't have to worry about, will the cop pulling me over, will this be my last day? Or always have to check in and, live under that threat of suspicion all the time. I think that's what will be the change for me personally.
Thanks so much to my high school friends Nate Jackson and Coy Daly for sharing their stories and experiences. And as always, if you have stories of your own that you'd like to tell me, you can record a voice memo on your phone and send it to info@farfromhomepodcast.org. Regular emails are also welcome, or you could hit me up on social media by following Far From Home on Instagram or Facebook. And you could tweet me at Scott Gurian. Thanks to Katie McGee and Jessica Williams for editorial assistance. Thanks also to the Public Radio Exchange for podcast hosting and technical support. My logo comes from Polemic, which designs award-winning experiences all over the world at the intersection of culture, commerce, and community. Find out how they could help your business at polemicdesign.com. Until next time, thanks for listening, and wherever you are, I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy.
And I'm not saying the whole country's bad. I've met a lot of good people. I've even had conversations with people who said, I've never really interacted with black people. I'm being real with you. And we've had conversations, real conversations. They were like, I'm actually glad we got to talk. I've been in many of those and it's been actually phenomenal. Talk about at the end, they're like, I'm buying you a beer. I'm like, I'm buying you one too. So that's, again, brings hope.